If someone had told me, all those years ago, that I would one day stand trembling in the candlelit antechamber of Baron Caldwell's manor, waiting to be handed over like a prized heifer, I might have laughed in disbelief. Yet as I sit here, so many decades later, recalling the nervous pounding of my heart and the rustle of my mother's worn petticoat as she fussed with my dress, the memory is as vivid as yesterday's breath. It was 1948. And the air was thick with the scent of beeswax and lilacs. The household staff moved in hurried silence, eyes lowered, and somewhere downstairs, the men's voices blended with the distant clatter of dinner plates and the persistent howl of a late spring windag. Ain't the old brick walls. I was only 20 years old, just a farmer's daughter from the outskirts of Manchester, New Hampshire, and I understood my role as clearly as the calluses on my father's hands. I was to marry the Baron, a man older than my father, whose fortune might save our family farm. Keep your chin up, Ruth, my mother whispered, smoothing the folds of my pale blue dress, her fingers trembling as they pinned a faded silk ribbon into my hair. Her words held the weight of 1,000 unspoken sacrifices. You are doing what must be done for all of us. There was no comfort in her voice, only resignation, a resignation I had learned to mirror since childhood. I glanced out the narrow window, my gaze tracing the gravel path that wound from the stables to the main house. The grounds were dark, save for a single lantern bobbing in the distance. My sister Evelyn was nowhere to be seen, though she had promised she would help me through the ordeal. Evelyn, only 17 but already notorious for her headstrong ways and wild, untamable hair, had spent the day darting between the kitchen and the rose gardens, vanishing every time our mother called for her. I longed for her presence, her laughter, her rebellious spirit, but she had been elusive all day, leaving me to the judgmental stares of the housekeeper and the whispered warnings of our aunts. A sudden gust rattled the window pane, and I jumped, clutching at my bodice. My reflection in the glass looked ghostly and strange, almost as if I were already a stranger to myself. The door creaked open, and in stepped Mrs. Kinsley, the Baron's housekeeper, her severe bun and starched apron giving her the appearance of a prison warden. She eyed me with something between pity and disdain. The Baron is ready, she intoned, her voice flat as an ironing board. You will come with me. Now my knees buckled, but I stood. I forced myself to walk one foot in front of the other, through the dimly lit corridor that smelled of polish and old paper. Portraits of Caldwell ancestors glared down at me from gilded frames, their painted eyes glinting in the lamplight. I could not help but wonder what they would think of this bargain, the old nobleman taking a common girl as his bride. The collapse of tradition masked by necessity. Mrs. Kinsley led me past the grand staircase, its red carpet plush and silent underfoot, and toward the drawing room where the Baron awaited. As we drew closer, I could hear his voice, calm, measured, discussing something with my father, who had never set foot in such a grand house until necessity forced him, whose dignity was now bartered for the promise of a good harvest. I wondered if he was as afraid as I was. Wait here, Mrs. Kinsley instructed, stopping me at the ornate double doors. I stood alone, listening to the hush of expectation in the hall, the ticking of the grandfather clock, and the low murmurs within the room. My palms were slick with sweat. I remembered Evelyn's words that morning, as she had helped me braid my hair. If I were you, Ruth, I would run. I would leap over that stone fence and disappear into the woods before anyone could stop me. I had laughed, nervous and unconvinced, but now I could not help but wish I had taken her advice. The door swung open with a solemn creak, and I was ushered into the drawing room. The Baron stood by the fireplace, his frame tall and angular, his gray hair immaculate beneath the glow of the chandelier. My father was seated on the edge of a brocade chair, hat in hand, his eyes fixed on the carpet. There was an air of ceremony, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Ah, Ruth, the Baron greeted, his voice grave. Come forward. I obeyed, keeping my head low, as if humility might shield me from the inevitability of it all. He studied me with the practiced gaze of a man accustomed to measuring livestock and ledgers. You are a sensible girl. Your father speaks highly of you. I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire. I felt the weight of generations pressing down upon me, the expectations, the duty, the unspoken hopes of a family clinging to survival. The Baron continued, the arrangements are simple. Tomorrow at noon, We shall be wed here, in the presence of our families. Your father and mother will remain as our guests. The dowry has been agreed upon." My father cleared his throat. His voice rough as gravel. "Thank you, sir. Ruth is a good girl." The Baron nodded, his expression inscrutable. "We shall see." I wanted to cry, to scream, to beg for mercy, but instead I stood motionless, my hands clasped tightly in front of me. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in a guest room furnished with rose-patterned wallpaper and heavy curtains, listening to the wind whistle through the eaves and the distant tolling of the church bell. Evelyn did not come to me, though I waited until the moon was high, my heart aching for her mischief, her comfort. I wondered where she was, whether she hid in the old barn, or beneath the kitchen stairs, or in the shadowed alcoves of the garden, plotting some reckless escape. As dawn broke, painting the world in hues of gray and silver, Mrs. Kinsley appeared, with a breakfast tray and a set of wedding clothes, a modest cream dress, a pair of gloves, and a lace veil yellowed by time. She helped me dress in silence, her hands surprisingly gentle. By noon, the drawing room was filled with the scent of lilies and the uneasy hush of guests. My parents stood together, pale and stoic. The Baron, resplendent in his formal coat, waited by the window. I took my place beside him, my mind a blur of dread and resignation, and then, just as the ceremony was to begin, the door at the back of the room swung open. Gasps filled the air. There, dressed in the very bridal gown meant for me, stood my sister Evelyn, her eyes blazing with defiance, her lips set in a daring smile. The world seemed to stop. I stared at her, uncomprehending, as she stepped forward. Her presence electric and undeniable. The room erupted in whispers, and for the first time in my life, I realized that nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. For a long moment, no one in that room moved. The sound of Evelyn's footsteps on the polished wood floor echoed like a challenge. Every eye fixed on her slight figure draped in the heavy folds of the wedding gown. I stood frozen, numb with disbelief and a dawning sense of terror that settled cold in my belly. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock, while my father's face seemed to pale even further. The skin stretched taut over his jaw. The Baron himself, a man unaccustomed to surprises, looked thunderstruck, his brow furrowed as if he were trying to solve a riddle that should never have existed. Evelyn paused beside me, close enough that I could see her trembling, though her chin was held high and her eyes sparkled with a boldness that had always seemed foreign to me, yet now I envied. She reached for my hand, her fingers squeezing tight, and in that simple gesture, I felt both apology and resolve. My heart hammered wildly as she turned her gaze from me to the Baron. "I am sorry, sir," Evelyn began, her voice surprisingly steady, "but it will not be Ruth who stands with you today. If you must have a bride from our family, it shall be me." There was a gasp from one of our aunts, and a murmur rippled through the guests' neighbors, distant relatives, and the Baron's own acquaintances, all eager for the gossip that this spectacle would surely fuel for years to come. The Baron's lips pressed together in a thin line, and for a moment I thought he might shout or demand Evelyn be removed. Instead, he regarded her with a long, measured silence, as if weighing the situation in his mind. His voice, when it came, was low but carried an undeniable authority. "This is highly irregular. You would defy the wishes of your family. The agreement was for Ruth." Evelyn did not flinch. "With respect, sir, this arrangement was made without asking what either of us wished. I may be young, but I am not a child. If it is a bride you seek for your legacy, I am no less a Caldwell wife than my sister." My mother moved as if to speak, but my father placed a gentle, trembling hand on her arm. For once, my parents seemed powerless, their lives and hopes caught up in the sudden whirlwind that Evelyn had summoned. I could see tears shimmering in my mother's eyes, her face contorted by confusion and fear, while my father's shoulders sagged as if the burden of all his years had doubled in an instant. The Baron's gaze shifted from Evelyn to me and back. Again, I forced myself to speak, my voice brittle and thin. "Evelyn, you do not have to do this." I could not keep the tremor from my words, nor the longing for her to run, to save herself from the fate that had always been mine to bear. Evelyn squeezed my hand again, her touch fierce. "I am not running, Ruth, not this time." Her words were a quiet promise, a binding tether that both comforted and terrified me. I knew in my heart she was not doing this for herself, not really. She was doing it for all of us, for freedom, for the chance that one of us might live differently, even if it meant sacrificing her own dreams. The Baron seemed to weigh her words as if they were currency. Finally, he looked to my father, his voice clipped. "Is this how your family conducts its affairs?" There was a quiet accusation there, the sense of control slipping from his grasp, and I feared what that might mean for us all. My father swallowed, the words seeming to scrape from his throat. "Baron Caldwell, I am sorry for this confusion, my daughters," he faltered, glancing at both of us. "They are both strong-willed, perhaps more than I ever realized, but if this is Evelyn's wish, and you will have her, we must accept her choice." A tense silence followed, broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock. The air felt thick with possibility and danger, the world tilting on the precipice of some new future none of us could see. The guests watched, spellbound, as if they were witnessing a play rather than the unraveling of real lives. The Baron turned fully to Evelyn, his eyes boring into her. "You would marry me, then? Knowing all that it would require, knowing the life you would leave behind?" Evelyn met his gaze, her jaw set. "Yes, sir, if my family is to be saved, let it be my choice. I will not see Ruth or my parents suffer for a decision made out of desperation. I can bear this." For a moment, her voice faltered, but she recovered with a strength I had never seen in her before. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw my sister not as the wild, impulsive child I had always known, but as a young woman willing to face the storm for all of us. My chest tightened with love and pain, the edges of my vision swimming as I struggled to remain standing. The Baron nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "Very well, if this is the will of your family and the bride herself, let it be so." He turned to address the gathering, his voice rising above the stunned silence. "The ceremony shall proceed." But with Evelyn as my bride, the room seemed to exhale all at once, a mixture of relief, shock, and perhaps even a hint of admiration for Evelyn's courage. My mother wept quietly into her handkerchief, my father bowed his head, and I stood at my sister's side, gripping her hand as if it were the last solid thing in a world turned upside down. The ceremony began anew, the minister's voice trembling, as he repeated the vows meant for me, now spoken to Evelyn. I watched as she stood tall, her chin high, her eyes dry and determined. When the time came for the final question, Evelyn's "I do" rang clear as a bell. The Baron slipped the ring onto her finger, sealing a fate that none of us could have imagined when we woke that morning. After the vows, as the guests filed out in hushed astonishment, Evelyn squeezed my hand one last time before turning to face her new husband. I caught her eye, and in that fleeting glance, I saw 1,000 unsaid words, a promise that our bond would never be broken, no matter where the future might lead. As the drawing room emptied and the daylight faded, I was left standing alone, my heart both heavy and light, forever changed by the courage of a sister who had rewritten both our destinies with one impossible choice. The days that followed Evelyn's wedding passed in a blur, each one marked by a hush that settled over our family like an early frost. The manors seemed both grander and emptier, the high ceilings and polished floors echoing with footsteps that no longer belonged to us. My parents and I stayed on as guests, as the Baron had promised, but the air was thick with the awkwardness of new arrangements. The staff watched us with guarded curiosity, and every glance between my mother and father carried the silent ache of sacrifice. I found myself wandering the manor's endless corridors, seeking solace in the quiet of the library or the rose garden, where the scent of blooming petals mingled with the memory of my childhood. My mother busied herself with sewing and small talk, always keeping her hands occupied as if afraid that stopping for even a moment would invite the pain to surface. My father spent long hours walking the estate, sometimes with the Baron, more often alone, his shoulders hunched beneath the weight of gratitude and regret. We seldom spoke of what had happened, as if naming it aloud would shatter the fragile peace we had managed to keep. Evelyn, meanwhile, took to her new life with a kind of stubborn dignity. I watched her at dinners, sitting beside the Baron, her posture straight and her eyes calm, though I could always spot the flicker of restlessness in her expression. She wore the fine dresses gifted by her new husband, her hair swept up in the style of noble women, but she never lost the spark that made her uniquely herself. She spoke only when spoken to, answered politely, and never complained, yet I saw the effort it took for her to keep her spirit from buckling under the weight of her duty. The Baron, for his part, remained a figure of mystery to me. He treated Evelyn with a measured respect, neither unkind nor affectionate, as if he, too, was unsure of how to proceed with this unexpected union. I would sometimes find him reading in the study or walking the grounds in the early mornings, his face contemplative, almost sad. There was no joy in their marriage. Not in the sense that I had once imagined as a girl, dreaming of romance by the lamplight. Instead, there was a silent understanding between them, a pact born of necessity, held together by pride and circumstance. One afternoon, a week after the wedding, Evelyn found me in the rose garden, my hands buried in the soil. As I tried to busy myself with the weeds, she knelt beside me, brushing dirt from her skirt, her eyes bright in the sunlight. "You do not need to hide from me, Ruth," she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of exhaustion and affection. "I am still your sister no matter what dress I wear or what title they give me." I felt a lump rise in my throat and shook my head, unable to meet her gaze. "You should not have done it, Evelyn, it should have been me." "That was the bargain." Evelyn reached for my hand, her fingers warm and steady. "No, you would have broken under this, Ruth. I saw it in your eyes that morning and I could not let them steal your happiness. I am strong in ways you are not, and you are gentle in ways I will never be. Perhaps that is why it had to be me." We sat together for a long while, the silence between us filled only by the hum of bees and the rustle of leaves. I wondered if she truly believed her words or if she was only trying to comfort us both, to make sense of a sacrifice that neither of us had chosen. I wanted to argue, to insist that she deserved better, but instead I pressed her hand to my cheek and closed my eyes, drawing strength from her presence. That evening, the Baron called for me. I found him alone in the study, surrounded by the scent of leather-bound books and pipe smoke. He regarded me with a look that was neither unkind nor particularly warm. "Ruth," he began, "you and your family are welcome to remain here as long as you need. I hope you understand that I bear no ill will for what happened. Your sister is a remarkable young woman." I nodded, unsure of what to say. "Thank you, Sir. Evelyn is stronger than anyone knows." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. "She reminds me of my own sister many years ago, stubborn, full of life, unwilling to let circumstance dictate her fate. It is a rare quality in these times." He hesitated, then added, "I would like to see you and your family settled, Ruth. I have spoken with your father about the farm. Arrangements will be made to ensure its security." Tears stung my eyes, both from relief and the sharp sting of pride. "Thank you, Baron Caldwell. You are very generous." He offered a faint, sad smile. "Perhaps not generous, only practical. We all do what we must for those we love." Life in the manor settled into a new rhythm, though I often felt like an actor playing a part in someone else's story. Evelyn and I would steal moments together when we could, laughing quietly over old memories or simply sitting side by side in silence. She confided in me that the Baron was fair but distant, always treating her with courtesy but never with affection. "I think he is lonely," she told me once, her voice soft in the dark, "but he does not know how to ask for what he needs." Maybe neither do I. As summer deepened and the days grew longer, I saw less and less of Evelyn. She took on the duties of her new household with resolve, overseeing the staff, attending dinners, and standing beside the Baron at social gatherings. Sometimes, when I caught her alone by a window or in the garden, she looked out over the fields with a longing. I recognized a yearning for a freedom that could never fully return. Eventually, the time came for my parents and me to leave. The arrangements for the farm had been settled, and there was no reason for us to linger any longer. On our last night, Evelyn slipped into my room, her arms wrapped tightly around me as she whispered her love and promises to write. I clung to her fiercely, not wanting to let go, fearing that this goodbye would change us in ways I could not yet understand. The next morning, as our carriage rolled away from the manor, I looked back to see Evelyn standing at the window, her hand pressed to the glass. In that moment, I realized how much we had both lost and gained, how sacrifice, when chosen with love, could shape the course of not just our lives, but the lives of everyone around us. If you have felt the weight of love and duty, if you have watched someone you care for step into the unknown for your sake, then you know that such stories do not end. They echo across years and generations, shaping who we become. If you enjoyed my story, subscribe to the channel now and do not miss the special playlist of stories from the past, where every memory hides a new secret waiting to be revealed. I will see you in the next chapter of our journey through time.